Indian tradition, which was very much doing rituals. And it was, so you might say that he wasn't able to function so well. Kind of the way I was implying, he wasn't able to function so well in society. But actually, it turns out that he couldn't, because of his experiences of seeing the Divine Mother everywhere, and later his experience of oneness with all of being, he wasn't able to perform those duties, but he began to be a teacher, and he trained many swamis. And if you go to India today, you'll see Ramakrishna missions to serve the poor. There are many Ramakrishna free hospitals that are to serve the poor in India. So his work turned out to be much larger than the ritual work that he wasn't able to perform. And of course, we mentioned that his main disciple, Swami Vivekananda, came here and started the Vedanta societies in different parts of the U.S. back in the late 1800s. So there's the idea that a mystic is someone who goes in an altered state of consciousness and isn't practically able to function in the world is maybe a misunderstanding. So what we call mystical is something that we don't understand. You know, someone 500 years ago saw an airplane flying in the sky. They would think it's magical, it's otherworldly, it would be not understandable. If you show them pictures from the new telescope of galaxies and stars and tell them there's 100 billion galaxies and 100 billion stars in each one, they would think you were crazy. And when psychedelics first came into being, when LSD first came into being, Sandoz, a pharmaceutical company, was making it and giving it out to psychiatrists, doctors, to see what do we do with this? They didn't know what to make of it or what to do with it. So they're just giving, you could order a ton of it, enough for 1,000 doses, and just to experiment with, so they could figure out how do we use this. And the first thought was, this is, they called it, I think I mentioned, a psychotomimetic, meaning that it imitates a psychotic experience. And that was the first kind of attempts to work with psychedelics. They thought if someone so-called normal takes it, they would have a psychotic-like experience and they could understand what a schizophrenic is like. That was some of the early first work with LSD. There was other work that was done. Some of you saw this in the movie, How to Change Your Mind, that was done through the CIA, or the version of the CIA we had back then, and where they were using it as a potential tool in warfare. So I'm bringing that up as psychedelics were when things are not understood in our logical frame of reference, we call them mystical, or something that's not normal, or something that needs to be fixed, or psychotic, or we just don't have an understanding of it. And we think it's something that's very impractical in everyday life. You know, don't get into psychedelics, you're not going to be able to live an ordinary life. Or don't get into meditation too deeply, you'll just want to sit and you won't be able to live in a practical way. That's at least some people's notions about that. Someone was, my grandson was telling me just the other day, on my birthday, we had a gathering, and he said, this Rogers, his girlfriend's a witch. And he was all, concerned that, because to him, he didn't understand how could, a normal person be with someone that's unusual in the way his girlfriend is. So, and then there's a mystic named William Blake, English mystic who lived in the early 1800s, and he said things like, "To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." He was describing his own transcendent state of consciousness, a transcendent state of consciousness that might be familiar to someone taking a psychedelic. To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. And so for our ordinary mental state, mental subject-object consciousness here in the West, something like that sounds mystical. It's not understandable. Can't be put in a framework of words and concepts. Another quote from Blake. Well, let me say it another way first. So, another way to understand the non-mental state of consciousness is to see it as a letting go of constrictions in our everyday functioning. I remember when I got cataract. I had cataract surgery, and before I had cataract surgery, I knew things were a little clouded, and when I would look at things, and for most of my life I had to wear glasses, and so that wasn't too unusual. Maybe the strength I needed got a little stronger. And after I had cataract surgery, I was surprised at the difference. Like suddenly, colors were very vivid. I could see things in colors. It was kind of like, when they clean up a painting, like a Leonardo painting that's kind of got yellow and dark, and then they clean it up and it's got all these bright, vivid colors. And so when I had cataract surgery, it was kind of like that. I was surprised that not only could I maybe see with needing less of a power in glasses, but suddenly colors cleared up, and I realized I've been seeing things, they were all kind of yellow, kind of like the paintings that have worn over time. And so that's a good analogy, I think, for understanding how letting go of our constricted consciousness, which I'll talk about more, opens us up to not a mystical kind of altered state. People think about taking psychedelics. Well, I took LSD. Well, did you see colors? They think of someone going into some being interested in seeing all these sort of unusual kind of colors and shapes, and don't usually, if they haven't had the experience, they don't think of it as just clearing up the constrictions and seeing things directly and clearly as they really are. There's a very big difference in how people who haven't had the experience might imagine it and what one really experiences. And so another quote from Blake that you may have heard before, he says, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite." And woman, back then they didn't include women in their ideas of people. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man or woman as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. So it's a famous quote. The doors the group, the rock group, the Doors, took their name from this. Aldous Huxley wrote a book called The Doors of Perception, one of the first books to talk, in which he talked about his mescaline experiences. And I want to read to you from this book another example of that kind of fits with what we're talking about. This is a book called LSD and the Mind of the Universe. Did I show that to you? It's called, the subtitle is Diamonds from Heaven by Christopher Bach, if I'm saying his name right. And it's a pretty amazing book. This is a man who was a professor of religion until he retired throughout his life. And he had a series of LSD experiences in which he took a very high dose, something like 600 micrograms, which was unusually large dose. And he did this over many years, like maybe twice a year. And he had some really astounding experiences, which he kind of wrote about approaching it from a kind of a spiritual and philosophical point of view. And at one point he talks about, he says, this is describing one of his experiences. After a period of time in this transcendental ecstasy, I was drawn back into the form of everyday life. But now there was a thin film separating me from my experience. I had this distinct sensation of being once removed from the flow of my own experience, as though I was getting it secondhand. I was slightly displaced from the present moment, getting all my experience just after the fact. My experience was also slightly out of focus. Everything was slightly smeared, spatially and temporarily. So you can maybe see the analogy to what I was saying about having cataracts before they're removed. At first, this subtle distortion was just irritating, but it became increasingly troublesome. No matter how hard I tried, I could not get back into my experience. I was being excluded from the full intimacy of my own life. It was as if I were a ghost, unable to climb back into my life. Experiences that had previously been joyful were spoiled by the slight displacement that took the edge off of life. I was trapped in a pervasive distortion that could not be solved by having one type of experience rather than another, but only by shifting into a different mode of experience altogether. Then suddenly I broke through into an incredibly sharp, intense, and bright mode of experiences. I was back inside Chris Bach's immediate experience, but now in a much more intense and luminous form of that experience. And this is the part that's especially interesting to me. I then realized that the displacement from immediacy I had been experiencing was in fact my normal way of existing in the world. The crystal-like clarity state was illuminating a pervasive distortion inherent in my everyday consciousness. So, having been previously in this crystal-like clarity of the LSD experience, and then losing that, showed him the contrast, showed him the difference between really being present and here and embodied. And what he realized then was his ordinary experience. He didn't realize how disconnected his ordinary experience was until he had the contrast. It was as though if I had my cataract surgery and then I went back to seeing with my cataracts, then let me just finish this quote. The contrasted immediacy of this laser-like clarity made my usual mode of experience intolerably dull. Ordinary mind is so diluted compared with this. All my life I thought I had been conscious, but now I saw that I had only been half conscious, trapped in a permanent fuzzy haze, like a nearsighted man without glasses. The entire remainder of the session was spent in this higher super clarity focused in the here and now. No transpersonal exotica. No transpersonal, again, it wasn't about seeing colors and shapes and weird things under LSD. It wasn't about some exotica. No hyper-luminosity focused in my immediate experience. I was greatly relieved when I first made the transition back into the luminous clarity. So I thought that was a really clear example of, and there are other examples of people who have awakened in consciousness and talk about ordinary consciousness as being less than, as being kind of a dulled down experience. Now that's a little disheartening for us to hear, maybe, if it's to say that. On the one hand, on the other hand, perhaps it lets us imagine or have a sense that there, as rich as we may feel our experience is, it's just there's something much more rich and much more immediate and much more full that is available to us, and that we can also experience, whether it's on a substance like LSD or through practices that lead us more into the present moment. And so part of those practices I want to talk about have to do with, what is it that diminishes our everyday awareness from its full potential? And there's a lot of things we could talk about, but one area that's becoming very prominent in the field of psychotherapy is the whole field of working with trauma. And of course in psychedelics, there's a lot of research being done on, especially in helping people release themselves from being stuck in trauma through psychedelics. But in psychotherapy itself, there are many new approaches, I would say in the last 10, 15 years, that are focusing on trauma. Now, trauma can mean something like really terrible, like being a child being molested, or threatened in some very severe way. But, or soldiers, the trauma that soldiers experience in war situations. But trauma occurs in other ways throughout our childhood and throughout our lives. A child who has been acting up and is hit by the father or by the parent, maybe hit with a belt. That was something I experienced as a child, and back in my generation and generations before, it wasn't unusual for parents to try to control their kids through hitting them. And I remember when I was hit for acting up, and that I would cringe, I would kind of get into this position, try to protect myself. And that's just one of many possible examples of how we might experience trauma. And so when that happens, the body freezes in a certain way. It contracts in a certain way. And we carry that in us perhaps throughout our lives. There can be a trauma through embarrassment, and we might kind of contract in a way from that. There's all sorts of things that happen as we're growing up that lead us to adopt certain bodily positions. One position might be we might put on a brave front and have our chest out and hold ourselves this way. But that's also a contracted way of being that we carry with us. And I studied a lot. I had a friend named Ron Kurtz who developed Hakomi therapy. And he really studied people's body postures and how the different ways, the different types of postures reflected different orientations to dealing with trauma, and then working with that to help them relieve that. So, I'm bringing this up as one of the as how that we're beginning to understand in psychology how this dulled down relationship to the world comes about. One of the major ways then is protecting ourselves from assaults from others or from the world. Another way is imitating. I may have mentioned this last time. We learn to imitate when we're little, the people that we're with. So if our parents have reacted to trauma and holding their body in a certain way, or avoiding talking about certain things or dealing with certain things, we kind of imitate that. It's been interesting to me when I see sometimes blind people who are musicians, how different their bodies are than most people. We have learned to hold our bodies in a certain way, and we may be pretty free, more or less, but they haven't. They're not imitating somebody they've seen, so they move in certain different ways. There's just a different rhythm or flow to how they hold themselves, simply because they haven't been shown you're supposed to have your body like this. So a lot of the work. And so our body becomes frozen in the particular pattern that we've developed. And we could try a little experiment here if you like. Would you like?
Sure.
Just a little thing is, just imagine a situation. It could be a past situation or something you just imagine, where you imagine you're in a situation where you're frightened, where you feel fear, and just notice as you do that, as you feel this sensation or this experience of fear, and you see yourself in that, notice what happens in your body. Is there any change that occurs in your body? Just that simple. And let's try another one. Just try a situation where you feel sad, a major sadness. Somebody passed away, or something loss or something, and you just feel sad. And notice again what's it like in your body. And let's do another one or two a little bit differently. So my friend Ron Kurtz I said developed Hakomi therapy. One of the ways he would work with people would be asking them to pay attention to what goes on inside, maybe their body or whatever reaction goes on inside. And he would sometimes say something to a person and just ask them to notice what happens when he says that. So let's try a couple of that. I'm going to say something, and your job is simply to just be aware of whatever happens when you hear me say this. What do you notice when I tell you you can feel safe now? Let's say it, something similar again. Try it again. What happens when I say to you, you can feel safe here? Okay, so let's talk about these three experiences. What they were like. Did you notice? Did you have a internal response to each of them? And anyone would want to share?
What was the first one again?
The first one was
fear.
Fear.
Oh, fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I get really tight in here.
Uh-huh.
My right hip tenses up.
You felt that happen?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
My hands clenched each other immediately.
Yeah.
I felt like I'm in inflammation, like kind of like a swelling or like a burning.
Mm.
It wasn't a pleasant feeling.
Mm. Uh-huh. Anyone else wanna?
Yeah, just general, just like almost like everything clenches a little bit. Just tightness.
Yeah, I tensed up and I could feel my shoulders kind of hunching forward a bit.
Yeah. You wanna?
I just find it really hard. Like, I could try to think of times that I felt those emotions, but I didn't feel anything when I was trying to think about that. So it's hard for me to connect with those emotions just on demand.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
the first two I get stomach sensations were just uncomfortable,
Yeah.
kind of nauseous a little bit.
So imagine now if maybe you imagine, or maybe it's true that if we're carrying some sense of fear, maybe we're not so conscious of it a lot of the time, but from our past, things have happened to us and we were afraid. Parents were fighting with each other, or all sorts of things, and we were afraid, and so these kinds of reactions occur, and they're distinct for one person. Maybe for you it's your stomach, for someone else it's you're down here, and so we carry these unconsciously, these fears that happened long ago, and most of us are still there in our bodies, and we're carrying those reactions, even though because we're used to it, we're not aware. If we saw the contrast, like at Bach in this, he saw the contrast between being in this luminous state of consciousness and the ordinary, then he could be aware of the way that he was not fully present. So I think the field of therapy now is becoming more and more aware of that we're all holding in various ways constrictions from past traumas. How about the one about sad?
Again, with my hands, I immediately felt like I wanted to soothe someone with my hands, touch someone. When you were saying, imagine feeling sad, I wanted to reach out.
Like, it wasn't you that was sad, it was someone else?
I think it was just looking for that contact comfort point, whether it was
For yourself?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else?
I felt it I felt a lot of pressure in my chest and back, and almost like I was hunching over.
I think I felt something similar, kind of in more in the heart and chest, kind of a collapsing inward. I didn't physically feel it this much, but I could. It was right at the heart.
Initially, I felt my eyes well up a little bit, and then my body started to feel tingly and numb, almost like I was dissociating a little bit.
Like you were what?
Dissociating a little bit.
So you see, that's another, if we've had experience of sadness or loss, and we all have had that, again, we may well be carrying these reactions in our body. And what about the you can feel safe? How did you respond to that?
I gasped.
You gasped.
Yeah, it was like I had to feeling. Like as soon as you said you can feel safe, it was almost like, and then it was a release. But it was almost like I was holding, and then when I heard that, it's like, it's almost like when my dog, I don't know if you guys have this with your dogs, but when you're like hugging them and they kind of gasp because they're so emotional. It was sort of like that.
I just felt very at ease. It felt very natural. Like it was like whatever I was doing was exactly what I should be doing. And that felt nice.
Any other responses to that?
That one for me, I felt in my heart space. I felt it opening and I saw images of purple flowers.
I saw images of trees around me.
Did anyone have a doubtful reaction or like a? Did you?
No, I didn't. But I think it's a
you're
good question.
Yeah. So in a therapy context, or in a group setting where it's a therapy group that Ron would work with, or work with someone in a group, often people here you felt pretty safe and pretty responsive, those of you that responded, but often people will feel like, I don't trust this, and they'll tense up to something like that, and then that becomes, for him, that then he would work with that person around that.
I think that's what I felt at the beginning.
And that's what I wondered. Is
And
that
then when
right?
you
Yeah.
said it again, then I started to let
Okay.
it go.
All right.
But I think the initial was like, sort
Yeah.
of like, wait,
Yeah.
do I trust it? Yeah.
Okay. Right.
I think for me, I felt with that one kind of like a tingling in my face, almost like the capillaries dilating or something.
Like a what?
Like the capillaries dilating, like when you feel that sensation of like you're, I don't know how to even describe it.
Was it a pleasant feeling, or was it kind of a tensing, or was it
It wasn't really either. It was kind of just an unusual sensation.
unusual? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, so one way of understanding or considering all that we're describing here is that these all kinds of tensions and trauma, reactions to trauma are held in the body, and they're held particularly in what's called the fascia. Do you know the term fascia? You're all familiar with that? Okay, I was hoping I'd have to explain it. So a lot of the work that's done to release these tensions that are held in the body can be done through what's called, for example, myofascial therapy. Through yoga can be helpful in that process. Things like Rolfing is working with the fascia, and these are ways of releasing that ways that we characterologically kind of freeze in certain ways in response to small or large traumas. There was a time that I was exploring, and I think you saw the video, I was doing body work. I would take LSD and then have someone do body work with me. So I was not only releasing trauma, but I was like super aware of what was happening. I started out with getting massage therapy while I was on LSD, and that released all kinds of emotions for maybe 8 or 10 times I did that, and then I began to feel it was too busy. I gave a talk on this at the MAPS conference about 2017, I think it was.
It was like 2012, 10 or 12.
2012, that
10 or
long.
12.
Okay, you're probably right, 2012. I gave a talk on my experiences. I said I was the client, and I brought one of the therapists with me to the talk, who was working on me at this conference, and so after the massage therapy, it felt too busy. The person was working here and here, and like, slow down, just stay here. So I shifted to getting myofascial work, and that would go deeper into and releasing certain, and in myofascial they call it unwinding, as one of the terms that they use for this process of letting go of, and some of the people I worked with knew I was on LSD, some didn't. Because I talked to one myofascial therapist, and she said, I asked her, well, would you mind if I take some LSD while you're working on me? And she said, no, we want you to be present and aware of what's going on. Thinking that I would be out, I said, well, that's why I want to take it, But from their point of view, what their training was, they couldn't understand that would make someone more present rather than less. So that was my way one of my ways of it's not that I thought, I didn't have all this conceptualized. It was just like I wanted to explore LSD in how it would work with this and that, and touch was very important to me in my life. It's my love language, these 5 love languages. I really am very, touch is somehow, has a big focus for me in my life. And so I wanted to experience that, and I would take LSD in all these different, not only with body work, but like, what's it like to go to Bora Bora and experience LSD, or go to Yosemite or New Zealand, and really not only experience nature, like how beautiful it is here, but in all these settings. Or what's it like to go to a museum like the Metropolitan, and really open up to these paintings and sculptures, and so I would kind of explore all these different avenues or ways of I guess being a psychonaut. Not a psychonaut, a psychonaut. To bring us back to how do we, so that's one way like a person can work with these constrictions within ourselves. But another way, in addition to that, is apart from having to do body work or any of these things, psychedelics in and of themselves, no matter what your situation is, will make you aware of these contractions and constrictions that are in the very fact that you're sort of opening your awareness to. Psychedelics are like an amplifier to what's occurring in the moment. They lead you to be more aware of yourself in the moment, and that could mean being aware of many things or in many ways. And one of the things that they lead you to be aware of is these contractions in your body. You take a psychedelic and you didn't realize, I'm always, what's going on? So I'm sort of stiff like this. You begin to feel the ways that you're not free and open, and sometimes it can be uncomfortable, or you begin to feel maybe not only your body, but you begin to feel some fears you have, or some paranoia, so these are other ways that are not just in the body, but ways that in our emotional self, in our mental self, we're kind of holding ourselves in a frozen pattern through fear or doubt or so on. And so, and I could talk more examples of that if we want. And so the psychedelics aren't trying to do that. They're just helping you to be aware. They're leading you, not helping, but they're leading you to be aware in the moment. And whatever's there in the moment is going to kind of come forward. And if what's there in the moment is a person that's lived their lives with all kinds of fears and contractions and the constrictions in the body, well, that's going to show up. And it may show up in a physical way. It may show up as a fear of this happening to me. It may show up in pain as pain, and so it used to be that these things would happen and they'd be labeled. I'd say, well, this person's enjoying themselves. We both took LSD and they're having a great time, and I'm in all this pain. I'm having a bad trip, you know. And we wouldn't realize that what we're calling a bad trip is simply the ways that we're being held back, revealing themselves to us, so that they can get some good attention and can get and really be accepted and integrated into our lives. I remember being back in the 70s. There were some they're festivals, you know, like little Woodstocks, before Woodstock, you know, maybe 5,000 people or so, you know, that were held in Poinet and Partyville. There were 2 of them, I remember. And some pretty big musicians, well-known musicians would come to these. And so, you know, a group of us would go and take LSD or something. This is before MDMA was around, before ecstasy was around. And at one of these festivals, a group of motorcycle club. I don't mean these days motorcycle clubs are all. These were hard kind of motorcycle guys came, and they set up in a certain area where there was a barn and all, and they were pulling people kind of into their sphere and threatening them, and actually molesting women. That actually went on, and I was on the edge of that, and I was walking with this girl that I was with. I thought I had a nice date for we could trip together, and we were on the edge of that, and somebody pulled us aside, and with a chain. I don't know if you like to hear this kind of story, but it kind of had a chain and kind of scary looking motorcycle guy, and was trying to pull us in to kind of molest her. And I saw people around us who people were kind of crawling around. They had them crawling in the grass and all. Pretty scary experience. And but because I was on LSD, I could see that these guys were a little scared too. You know, they were cautious and watching, and they weren't just such brave, you know, that they were trying to be. I could see their own, and I saw an opening where we could just run away and get away from them, you know, because of their cautiousness. But these guys were doing this through the night, and the next morning, the rest of the people at the festival had just had it, you know, and they started going after these guys and burning their motorcycles and chasing them out of there. And then as they were driving away, the police had set up a roadblock and caught a lot of them. So not a pleasant, it ruined my date. After that, things, you know, it was okay. It was still, but you know, once we got away and we were fine and all, but it still ruined the whole. So that's an example of a bad trip, if you want to call it that. Like, not having a safe environment, not having a set and setting, as they call it, that are safe and protective. And so that can cause a bad trip, and I guess you can learn from that too. But most of what people call bad trips are these painful aspects of ourselves that are coming to the surface so that we can be with them and help them to release. And so this happens, and this is one of the reasons that psychedelics are so successful with people who have had trauma, because this is what naturally occurs. And that's just one side of it. There can be many times where the psychedelic is not focused on that, but is bringing you into kind of an awareness of your connection with everything. Not sure where we want to go from here. Maybe, do anyone ask anything about from here? Yes.
I was just curious about the trauma that we hold, if it can also be ancestral.
Can also be-
Ancestral trauma.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So it can be, these things are passed on. So if my mother, for example, was pretty traumatized herself, was emotionally disturbed, I would say, and it came from her parents, and so these things, yes, are passed on from one generation to the other until somebody deals with it and releases that within themselves. Now, so I've been talking about psychedelics here so far, but the another avenue to release these ways that we've constricted ourselves is also through, I'm not sure what to call, I could say through meditation, but what I mean by meditation is not necessarily what other people mean by meditation. Meditations that are more open to the body's experience. Meditations that are not just concentrated meditations that are just on a mantra or but are open to whatever arises in the moment. You can call it meditation, you can call it a self-inquiry process that's not a mental self-inquiry, but a inquiring into, not conceptually, but feeling into what's occurring in the moment. That kind of inquiry does the same thing as a psychedelic, maybe not as dramatically, maybe it's over a longer period of time, but it's the same process, because in both cases, the constricted part of yourself is meeting an awareness that's non-judgmental. In the psychedelic experience, you open to a non-personal awareness, an awareness that's free from your constructions of your personality, and that non-personal awareness is inclusive. So it includes. It's able to meet. It's like grace meeting the parts of us that are fearful or constricted and held in certain ways and frozen in certain ways. In a psychedelic experience, that non-judgmental, inclusive awareness meets that, and what happens then is that constriction releases just naturally. Sometimes immediately, sometimes over time, sometimes it takes some repeated experience. So that happens in a psychedelic experience, and there I mentioned it's called, I always forget what it's called, the inner healing intelligence, this non-judgmental, this inner healing intelligence, or you might call it grace, comes into contact with, now I'm afraid of all these people spying on me, for example, and if I'm not judging that, and I'm going to get them, or I'm going to, or whatever, I'm going to hide, but I'm just going to feel how I'm afraid of that, and just allow that to be, it begins, I'm not feeding that distortion, and it just kind of dies because it's not being given energy. It's not giving judgmental, reactive energy. And that's exactly what happens in this self-inquiry or meditation process. So you're meditating and you're sensing into the moment, and initially what comes up are your preoccupations, your thoughts, or maybe a discomfort in your body. And if you don't react to them and say, oh no, I'm not meditating, I'm just in my thoughts, I may as well get up and do something else, it's not a good meditation. That's what some people do. If you don't say to your, I don't want to think about this, I don't want to feel this, oh, my chest is constricted, maybe I'll do some breathing, if you're not trying to get rid of whatever is occurring in the moment, which is what we normally tend to do, especially if it's uncomfortable, if we don't try to get rid of what's uncomfortable, if there is something like that, and we just allow this non-judgmental awareness, this inner healing intelligence to meet this uncomfortableness, to be present with this space that we're creating that's not reactive, then in the same way as in psychedelics, in this meditation, that split off part of us comes home, and it can feel safe. It can feel safe and relaxed. And so, as I understand it, these are both the same. This meditative way and psychedelics, they're both the same, because what's the same is that the awareness that we are, who we are, is this non-judgmental awareness. So whatever we do that brings us, that makes a space for us to not be distracted, but to feel that open awareness, whether it's taking a psychedelic or meditating or some other way, they'll all have the same function. It's not the approach, I'm meditating or I'm taking a psychedelic. It's that this grace is always waiting for us to come into and to heal whatever ways we've been split off. And so the psychedelics enable a space where we're not just caught up in those, but we're open to that full awareness. And meditation is a way of allowing that space of non-judgmental awareness. And there may be other ways, where people talk about being in flow and so on. But these are the two main, and I should mention psychotherapy. Psychotherapy that's based on this understanding, talking with someone in therapy and bringing up the experiences of fear or contraction or uncomfortableness in a way that's not trying to analyze them. Oh, you're uncomfortable because your father did this to you and now you understand it, now you should be better. Doesn't work. Or trying to change your behavior. Well, you're uncomfortable, but if you breathe like this and you change your thinking pattern and think of positive thoughts, then you'll get rid of that uncomfortableness. That works. They work to a very limited degree. Very limited degree. They don't heal. They just, shift. But we're still living, and we may feel we're living more healthily, but it's limited. But therapy that understands, that comes from an understanding of this inner healing intelligence. It doesn't try to change a person. It encourages someone to accept all of themselves, to be non-judgmental about all of themselves, in the same way that the meditation does and the psychedelic does. That therapy, that's one-on-one relationship meeting, that's done in that context, creates a space for that inner healing intelligence to be present and to naturally integrate these split off parts. So those are three avenues that serve the same function. Well, that's a lot of talk.
Do you have any like recommendations for like resources if I was looking for some of that meditation information?
To get meditation information.
About that type of meditation.
Well, the problem is there are good resources for talking about this, but very few that actually provide a meditation. One person I would recommend is a man named Adyashanti, Adyashanti. And I recommend, he's a Buddhist, I'm not a Buddhist, but he's a Zen, from a Zen tradition. And I like what he says. It's from this mode.
Mm-hmm.
And he also has some guided meditations from this approach. For example, some of his guided meditations are to allow everything to be as it is. And so that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
For understanding more of this, not necessarily a practice, there's a man named Rupert Spira, Spira, who I think is very clear in describing what we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
not about psychedelics, but about meditation.
Yeah, because boy, I have so much tension. Like I have to go to massage therapy every other week, and just to like not be in excruciating pain.
And not to be in excruciating pain. Oh wow. Yeah. So there, you might try myofascial release rather than massage. I think it goes deeper in releasing that tension. Or you might work with a therapist who is more from this mode and can work with the tension in your body. So that's what I would start with.
Cool.
That.
And what about some of your books?
What
What about some of your books? Any of your books touch on this topic?
Do any of my books
Your
touch
books.
on this topic? My books were, they were written a long time ago, so not so directly. I think my website more, a website, I don't know if you've seen that, beingawareness.org.
Okay.
They touch generally on it, but not so focused as we're talking about. Have you looked at any of them?
I just got a couple of them.
Well,
I just
you
ordered
tell
them.
me, do they touch?
I
on it?
haven't read.
You didn't
I haven't
read
read
it,
them
you
yet.
just
They
got
just
it.
one got here today, so I haven't read it
Okay,
yet.
which one?
Something at the emotions in the title. Something.
Emotion to Enlightenment?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't read it.
I didn't want to call it that. I wrote this book, I wanted to call it Beyond Identity. That was my title. And my teacher, he didn't like that, and he added a couple of sections of chapters and all about emotions, and changed it to Emotion to Enlightenment. So, anyway, inside story about it.
I'll let you know what I think.
Hmm?
I'll let you know what I think after reading it.
Any other thoughts or questions before we'll do a meditation practice?
I did have one question. Did you have one? No. The thing with the non-judgment. So I'm noticing that I'm having an easier time being less judgmental with myself. But I've noticed that when I'm feeling any kind of threat, and I don't mean physical, it's that kind of thing, like my judgment toward whoever I'm with, just I can notice it like firing off.
Judgment? What kind of judgment?
Like different varieties. For example, judging what, this just doesn't sound nice, but incompetence or inequity or something about fairness.
About yourself? Or-
No, about who?
About
Maybe
another person.
Another person.
Uh-huh.
Not my husband in this case. I'm thinking people I work with. If I'm feeling frustrated that, and it doesn't feel good. I mean, it doesn't feel good to feel judgmental, and I'm more aware of it happening now when
Yeah.
it does happen.
And so,
You know.
is there a space or time where when it's happening you could feel into it more?
Maybe not in the moment, per se.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I mean, afterwards, yeah. In the moment, it's a little tricky. Again, like, but yeah, I don't feel like I could like stop a meeting
Yeah.
necessarily.
So you might feel judgmental toward the person, or
Yeah.
what else?
I mean, the judgment being maybe like an umbrella that I'm
Yeah.
term for feeling something that's happening is inequitable, or I'm feeling resentment, or I'm feeling, you know, this person's incompetent, or this ugly stuff. But like, you know, that feeling that, and it doesn't like in the past maybe that would have felt like power. It doesn't feel like that. It just doesn't feel good. I don't
Yeah.
want to feel that way, but if I'm honest, I do. I feel judgmental. So I'm.
So,
yeah.
so what occurs to me is there some truth in what you're saying? In other words, there may be some truth. Maybe this person's not doing a good job or whatever. And then there's your personal reaction to that perception or that. In other words, you don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater, if I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
Just because if you work on, oh, I was judgmental and I'm feeling they're incompetent, if you can separate your reaction from the perception, is that making sense?
So not necessarily.
You don't
labeling it
have
as
to say,
judgment.
well, oh, I shouldn't think that, this
Oh.
person, why should I think they're incompetent, they're, you know, and so my stuff and all that stuff. Maybe they are, you know, maybe they're not doing a good job, and maybe they're off, and can you own your reaction as, you know, why is that bothering me? As I said that, I was feeling something in here. Are you?
No,
Okay.
no. What I was thinking was, how does that line up with this idea of interconnection? So if this person in front of me, if we're not separate, and I'm judging, or maybe I'm not judging, I'm just noticing what's real, at least for me.
Yeah.
How does that then align with that, whether it's non-judgment or radical self-love? Because there's judgment somewhere in there. I don't know if I'm saying this clearly, but something about the interconnection piece.
So, you know, this figure here, this Buddha, he has a sword, and he's the Buddha of discrimination. He cuts through bullshit. You know, he's not sitting there nice, oh, everything's sweet and all. He sees through things, and so it doesn't mean he's got to be emotional about it and get all involved and caught up in it, but yet he sees through things, and so it's a kind of a complex thing. And would it be possible for you to see clearly that this person is fucking up, or whatever, you know, put it bluntly?
What do you
And-
do then when you see it as it is? When you see it, I have a
Yeah.
big picture of Durga with all her swords
Oh,
and
yeah, you
whatnot.
like
The love-
Durga.
Oh yeah, I look at her
Yeah.
all the time during meetings.
Right.
But then what do you do with that then, in terms of holding that loving kindness with the
Yeah, well,
cutting
so,
the bullshit?
yeah, what do you do?
I
Can you
don't
be in a place of non-personally getting caught up in reacting and do what you feel needs to be done? Loving kindness doesn't mean enabling somebody, right? You can be loving kindness. Oh, I don't want to hurt his feelings, and I should. But you're not being in truth, and you're enabling that person to keep doing, and not learn from what he or she is doing.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. And it reminds me of something else you said recently about if I'm doing that from a place of truth, it's not my responsibility then.
If you're say it
If I
again.
do that from a place of truth, I'm not trying to hurt someone, I'm just trying to name what's honest, then it's not my responsibility to take care of them having this is something you said to me recently. It's not my responsibility to take care of their feelings about it. If I'm right, like, I mean, I can notice how they react, but it's also not, I can't control how they feel about
Yeah,
sharing that.
Right.
So,
And also then part of that controlling how they feel is somehow about your feelings, right? I don't want them to be mad at me or disappointed in me or this or that, and so that's also to be looked at, how you're trying to protect your feelings
right.
rather than just be truthful.
That's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. We can talk more. Sometime we talk about non-injury as a practice. I don't know. Maybe we do meditation for now. Or so. Anybody want to stretch first, or you're all good?
Is it a quick stretch?
Is that still recording? Or?
Yeah, it was, but